They say land remembers. I believe water remembers more. The lake behind my house wasn't just a body of water. It was the last living breath of my father's legacy. When he passed in 2014, the lawyer handed me more than just a dusty title deed and weather-worn plat maps. He handed me a promise. A piece of land and water my father once defended with all he had, from greedy developers, from city plans, from short-sighted neighbors. Now it was mine. And I swore I would do the same. My name is Daniel Riggs. I'm 57 years old, a retired environmental attorney, a widower, and a stubborn bastard, or so my neighbors in Meadow Hills like to whisper when they think I'm not listening. I don't mind. You can call me a recluse, a tree hugger, even a lunatic, but you can't say I don't fight for what I believe in, especially when it comes to that lake. It sat behind my modest two-story house like a mirror framed in pine and reeds, a glimmering half moon that breathed mist each morning and sang frogs to sleep each night. Its shoreline curved gently through my property and extended around to the south where the HOA's community park began. My father, a decorated Korean War veteran and lifelong civil servant, bought this land in the 70s before there was any talk of gated communities or development initiatives. The lake was always private, always protected, and half of it legally belonged to us. The Meadow Hills HOA had been tolerable for the first few years I moved back. I paid my dues, kept my lawn trimmed, attended the occasional neighborhood meeting out of courtesy. Back then, the board was composed of aging residents with little appetite for power plays. But everything changed when Karen Holt became president. She had the smile of a television anchor and the tone of a woman who believed the world owed her a podium. Newly divorced, recently relocated from California, and hell-bent on modernizing Meadow Hills, Karen swept into office promising revitalization. And that's exactly what she tried to do. Revitalize the lake, the walking trails, even the so-called underutilized green space, which just so happened to be my father's buffer zone. The first red flag, the glossy trifold brochures that showed up in every mailbox, marked with the Meadow Hills HOA's seal and the tagline, "Your future reimagined." They displayed plans for paddleboat rentals, a floating cafe, and a concrete pavilion extending into the lake. A shared community dock built right over my father's fishing spot. No permits, no approvals, no mention of the fact that a full third of the lake wasn't even theirs to touch. I marched straight to the next Meadow Hills HOA meeting with deed in hand, county maps printed, and my father's surveys marked in red ink. I raised my voice, not in anger, but in defense. I explained the legal boundaries, the environmental risk of building over a freshwater body, the absence of hydrological impact studies. Karen smiled at me, as if I were a child reciting bedtime fears. "Mr. Riggs, with all due respect," she said, her acrylic nails tapping against the podium, "our community voted for this. You can't stand in the way of progress." I reminded her gently, at first, that legal property lines are not suggestions. I offered to walk her through the documents. She brushed me off. Then a week later, construction markers appeared overnight along my tree line. Orange flag stakes and pink spray paint tracing the contour of my lawn down toward the lake. That night, I sat on my back porch with a tumbler of bourbon and my father's notebook on my lap. His neat looping handwriting was faded, but firm. "If they come for the lake, come back with the law." The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent 30 years fighting environmental abuse in cities and counties that didn't care. I had sued billion-dollar firms for dumping waste into wetlands. I had testified before judges, presented evidence in front of planning commissions, helped write policy that protected little lakes just like this one. And now I was about to go to war in my own backyard. The lake shimmered in the moonlight as I made my first call. Not to the county, not to a lawyer, but to an old friend, Sam Tate, my father's fishing buddy and former inspector for the State Department of Environmental Protection. If anyone knew how deep the water ran, it was Sam. He picked up after 2 rings. "Danny," he rasped, "is it time?" "Yeah, Sam, they've come for the lake." There was silence for a moment, then the sound of a long sigh. "Then I hope they know how to swim." That night, I made a promise to my father and myself I would not let Karen Holt or her Meadow Hills HOA cronies pour a single drop of concrete into the lake without consequence. I thought I had time to prepare, gather documents, file injunctions, send cease and desist letters. I was wrong. 3 nights later, at 2:16 a.m., I was jolted awake by the low rumble of diesel engines and the blink of floodlights across the water. They had brought in the trucks. They were already pouring. I grabbed my coat, my phone, and my boots, and I ran. I ran barefoot through the wet grass, heart pounding harder than it had in years. My breath fogged in the early spring air, my fists clenched, as the soft squelch of mud gave way to the harsh crunch of crushed gravel. It wasn't until I reached the ridge that overlooked the southern curve of the lake that I saw it lit like a scene from a crime thriller. 3 massive concrete trucks were parked on the dirt road adjacent to the Meadow Hills HOA's community park, their mixers rotating slowly like clockwork, ticking toward catastrophe. Bright halogen lights mounted on portable towers cast harsh white cones onto the shoreline, where half a dozen workers in yellow vests moved quickly, shouting over the engines. And then I saw her. Karen, in a wool coat, arms crossed, sipping from a thermos as if she were supervising a bake sale. I pulled out my phone and began filming. The crew had built a rough wooden form that jutted out into the water, a crude box meant to contain the poured cement. They were using wheelbarrows and chutes to send gray slurry cascading down toward the lake, covering rocks and sedge grasses, slipping past the edge and bleeding into the water. No erosion control, no silt fencing, no containment booms. It was criminal. It was insane. And worst of all, it was on my land. I stepped forward, my voice slicing through the noise. "You're trespassing." A few workers paused confused, but kept pouring. Karen turned slowly, and I saw her face twitch, not with guilt, but irritation. "Daniel," she said coolly, "you're making a scene. You're destroying a protected water body." I snapped, filming her face the trucks, the cement sliding into the lake. "You have no permits, no legal right, and you're on my land. Stop now, or I call the sheriff." Karen's smile curled like smoke. "Oh, we've already spoken to the sheriff's office. They're aware. This is approved by the Meadow Hills HOA Development Committee." I laughed, loudly. "There's no such thing as a development committee." Karen blinked, her smile freezing for half a second. I took another step forward. "I'm an environmental attorney, Karen. You think your fake titles and nighttime pours are going to hold up in court? You can take it up with our lawyers," she said, turning her back to me. I did. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the county building inspector, the Department of Environmental Protection, the zoning board, and the local water control district. I attached drone footage, time-stamped photos, tax parcel maps, and PDFs of the original property deed showing the lake's boundary line. The county office said they'd review it. Depp took a message. The zoning board said they'd look into the matter, but hadn't received any Meadow Hills HOA documentation on file yet. I knew what this was. The Meadow Hills HOA had convinced everyone it was a private internal matter. And Karen, she was leveraging HOA language like she was running a shadow government. Words like revitalization, plan amenity, expansion, community improvement project. But what it really meant was money. See, this wasn't about paddle boats or picnics. It was about profit. 2 days after the pour, I intercepted a printed flyer taped to mailboxes up and down the block. It was a pre-lease interest form for a planned community lake pavilion and event venue. Marketed for weddings, receptions, even private corporate retreats. Meadow Hills HOA members would receive a discounted rate. I circled 3 lines in red. Projected revenue stream, $40,000 in year 1. Private events will include lighting, music, and food vendor trucks. Shared access guaranteed through Meadow Hills HOA Charter Section 9B. Section 9B didn't exist in the charter. I checked twice. Karen wasn't just corrupt, she was rewriting rules on the fly. And the worst part? Most neighbors bought it. She had a gift, I'll give her that. Knew how to spin a vision that made people ignore the law. Progress, she'd call it. A rising tide lifts all boats. She even used that phrase once. At a meeting where I wasn't allowed to speak. But not everyone was blind. A few days later, I got a knock on my door. It was Tom Bellamy, quiet guy, lived 2 streets down, ex-fire marshal. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I think I need to show you something." We sat on my porch as he laid out a stack of documents, meeting minutes from an Meadow Hills HOA executive session that had somehow been excluded from the official neighborhood bulletin. He had kept them. Quietly. Because, as he said, something stank. The minutes revealed discussions about fast-tracking construction, To avoid permitting delays, donor investment opportunity from regional developers, and an offer from Bayside Resort Holdings to absorb HOA debts in exchange for event venue exclusivity. It wasn't just about a dock. They were selling off pieces of the lake. And since my land formed the eastern shoreline, the only way to physically expand the venue was to build into my property. Hence the cement. Hence the lies. Karen wasn't just overstepping, she was committing fraud and dragging the entire Meadow Hills HOA into it. Tom looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup. "You gonna stop this?" "Not me," I said. "We are." Over the next week, I turned my home into a command center. Every box for my legal career came out of storage templates for injunctions, whistleblower affidavits, Clean Water Act, case precedents. Sam helped contact his friends still working in DEP. I filed FOIA requests for Meadow Hills HOA emails. We mapped out stormwater drainage systems showing how runoff from the concrete poured directly into the natural feeder streams of the lake. Then one afternoon, something happened that shifted everything. A young girl, maybe 9 or 10, knocked on my door. Her name was Maddie. She lived on the western side of the lake. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Riggs, my dog went in the lake and now he's sick." I ran down to the bank with her. The water had changed color. Not gray, not muddy, but greenish gray. Frothy. Reeking of alkali. The dog, a golden retriever named Scout, was lethargic, vomiting. I took water samples, called a vet, sent samples to a private lab. The results, pH off the charts. Evidence of chromates, a toxic byproduct often found in industrial-grade concrete mixes. That night, I posted the report online. Attached drone footage, called out Karen by name, tagged every official I could think of. The post exploded. By morning, it had been shared 2,000 times. By noon, a local reporter showed up at my door. By sunset, Karen was standing on the front steps of the Meadow Hills HOA clubhouse, reading a shaky, prepared statement to a hastily organized press conference, insisting this was all an unfortunate misunderstanding based on disinformation from a disgruntled neighbor. I watched it live. She wore pearls and a pink blouse, and her hands were trembling. The sun had barely dipped below the tree line when the air turned heavy again, thick with tension like a thunderstorm without the rain. I'd spent the day compiling every piece of evidence I could, building timelines, marking maps, coordinating with neighbors like Tom Bellamy, and even some newer residents who were finally waking up to what was really happening. My living room looked like a legal war room. Whiteboards filled with Meadow Hills HOA bylaws, water sample results pinned to cork-printed Facebook screenshots in chronological order. And yet deep down, I knew something was coming, something worse. At 10:12 p.m., my landline rang. I hadn't heard it in years, kept it for emergencies and old war buddies. It was Sam Tate. "Daniel," he said, voice low. "They're moving in more trucks. I just passed them on Highway 12, headed your way." I hung up before replying, slipped on my boots, grabbed the drone and the night vision camcorder. By the time I reached the eastern edge of the lake, the trucks were already there. 3 more mixers, 2 flatbeds hauling timber. And this time they weren't just pouring cement, they were expanding the platform. Karen stood under the temporary lights, again clipboard in hand. She had a walkie-talkie this time, barking commands like she was running a military operation. 2 men in reflective vests were hammering rebar into what used to be a soft patch of wetland grass, a protected zone I had personally testified to conserve during my legal work 10 years prior. It wasn't just illegal, it was desecration. I crept up to the high ridge behind the tree line, crouched low, launched the drone with practiced hands. Its hum blended into the noise of the engines. From above, the scene looked even worse. At least 20 feet of artificial shoreline extension already in place, the lake's curve now lacerated by hard lines and poured concrete. Wildlife scattered at the edges. I saw no barriers, no permits posted, no biological monitors. The footage streamed in real time to my laptop. I hit record all. And then I called the county sheriff. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but disinterested. "We'll make a note, Mr. Riggs. If it's in Meadow Hills HOA authorized construction project, there's not much we can..." "No," I snapped. "This isn't just about property lines. They're violating federal law. Clean Water Act, Section 404. I'm recording everything. If your deputies don't get here tonight, I will submit this straight to the EPA regional office tomorrow morning." There was a pause, then understood. We'll dispatch a car. I didn't know if it was a promise or a brush-off, but just as I pocketed my phone, headlights crept up the gravel road behind me. I ducked low. A black SUV stopped near the trucks. Out stepped a man in a gray suit. Not a worker, not HOA. From my perch, I zoomed the camcorder. My jaw clenched. It was Jack Delaney, a name I hadn't heard in years. Delaney had once been a fixer for a land development firm that got slapped with a cease and desist order I filed in 2007. He specialized in making things disappear, permits, complaints, inspectors. He wasn't HOA. He was private money, which meant Karen had brought in outside investors. I could hear them talking faintly. Karen gestured toward the lake with exaggerated confidence. Delaney nodded. He didn't look at the water. He looked at the real estate. That's when it all clicked. They weren't building for the HOA. They were building over it. The next morning, my inbox exploded. The video footage I'd uploaded to a private Google Drive had made its way to a Facebook group. I wasn't even a member of Protect Meadow Hills Lake. Someone must have shared the link. Within hours, local media was calling. A blogger from the State Watch Environmental Coalition asked to quote my findings. A regional wildlife nonprofit emailed offering to file an injunction on my behalf. But the biggest surprise came just after lunch. An official envelope arrived by certified mail. The return address, Office of the Governor. Inside a single letter, Mr. Riggs. Your recent documentation regarding unauthorized construction and chemical discharge into a protected water body has reached our attention through multiple citizen channels. A state environmental response team has been dispatched for site review. You may be contacted by our field agents shortly. In service, Governor Rafael Montez. I stared at it, pulse thundering. I had sent my evidence to countless agencies, never expecting anyone at the very top would notice. But he had, the governor. And now the state was coming. Not weeks from now. Not during some distant court hearing. Now. That evening, I received a knock. Two officials in navy blue field jackets stood at my door, Maria Velez from the Department of Environmental Protection and Ellis Brandt from the Governor's Interagency Crisis Task Force. They didn't waste time. We've seen the footage, Brandt said. Can you take us there? I didn't speak. I just nodded, grabbed my keys, and led them down the wooded path toward the water's edge. We didn't even reach the shore before Maria stopped and said, "You can smell it from here." She was right. The air stank of lime and alkali. When we reached the half-built pavilion, Maria pulled out a field test kit, knelt down, and dipped a sensor into the water. It beeped 3 times. Brandt asked, "What's the pH?" 9.8, she said grimly. Toxic levels confirmed. She turned to me. "Mr. Riggs, would you be willing to testify if this goes to prosecution?" I looked out at the water, then back at her. My father built a life around protecting this lake. If they want a witness, they'll have to drag me out of the courtroom. What happened next unfolded faster than I could have imagined. The governor declared an emergency review of the site. Karen received a cease construction order within 24 hours. Delaney disappeared. Meadow Hills HOA's board fractured in panic. The news broke on every local station. Illegal cement dump prompts state disaster review. HOA project suspended amid toxic water findings. I watched it all from the porch, sipping the same bourbon my father used to drink, feeling the ache of justice slowly stretch its arms. Karen hadn't cried yet, but I could see it coming. In the twitch of her lips during that on-camera interview. In the way her voice cracked when she insisted it was all a misunderstanding. She was cornered. And this time, the water she tried to bury was rising back around her. They always say property disputes are the most emotional kind. Not because of the money, not even because of the land, but because it's yours. Your piece of the world, your fingerprint on the map. And when someone takes a piece of that without asking, when they cross your boundary and act like it's theirs, it doesn't just feel like theft, it feels like war. The morning after the governor's emergency review team visited the site, I stood at the edge of the concrete scar that now cut through my father's old shoreline, staring at the rebar stakes and the drying gray surface that had once been marsh reeds and turtle nests. 2 herons that used to wait in this cove were gone. The frogs had stopped croaking. Even the wind off the water felt different, dead somehow. I brought a land surveyor with me this time. Not just any surveyor, my surveyor. A man named Gerald Polk, who'd worked with my father back in the 80s and had the original topographic plats to prove it. We paced the eastern lot line together from the old oak with the iron horseshoe to the half-buried stone marker behind the boathouse. When we reached the edge of the poured platform, he looked down at the metal rods and grunted. 3 full feet under your property line, he said. Maybe more. This isn't borderline encroachment, Daniel. This is deliberate. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and kept my fists in my jacket pockets so I wouldn't clench them until my nails drew blood. We took photos, measurements, GPS coordinates. Gerald notarized the notes on site and agreed to file a certified affidavit for the court. He didn't charge me. Just looked me in the eye and said, "Your daddy was a hell of a man. Would have burned this whole thing to the ground if he'd seen it." "I'm not burning anything," I said quietly. "I'm going to bury them in court." But the Meadow Hills HOA didn't back down, not yet. 2 days after the cease construction order, I received a certified letter not from Karen, but from the Meadow Hills HOA's new legal counsel, Bixby and Lyle, a boutique firm known for representing high-profile property associations and real estate ventures. The letter accused me of trespassing, harassment, and intentional obstruction of a community improvement project. They claimed I was interfering with communal property and economic development. They even demanded I remove unauthorized surveillance devices, referring to my drone. I read it twice. Then I laughed so hard I startled Scout the golden retriever, who now rarely left my side since the cement pour. He wagged his tail nervously, sensing something between amusement and anger. I handed the letter to my attorney, Erica Lynn, a former EPA enforcement lawyer turned private consultant, whom I had worked with on several cases over the years. She barely glanced at it before snorting. "They're poking a bear with a paper straw," she said. "Let me handle it." She drafted a 36-page response, complete with citations from the Clean Water Act, the Property Owner Protection Act, and multiple Meadow Hills HOA internal contradictions. Attached were 2 affidavits, one from Gerald and another from a DEP official confirming the pH levels and toxin presence. We filed a countersuit that same week, but I wasn't done yet, because I knew Karen, and I knew she wouldn't go down without trying to manipulate perception, so I beat her at her own game. I took everything I had, every photo, every scanned plat map, every video, and turned it into a short documentary. 5 minutes, titled, "How the HOA Killed Our Lake." I narrated it myself, simple language. No legalese, just truth. I added before and after drone footage, interviews with neighbors like Maddie and her mom, clips of Karen's press conferences, even overlaid the blueprints of the illegal structure on top of the property map showing the blatant trespass. Then I uploaded it to YouTube, posted it to local Facebook groups, and sent it to every news outlet that had ever covered HOA corruption. Within 48 hours, it had over 80,000 views. Within 72, a state senator retweeted it with the caption, "Private citizens shouldn't have to fight this hard to stop environmental abuse." Karen tried damage control. She sent a neighborhood-wide email claiming selective editing misinformation and a coordinated smear campaign. But no one believed her anymore. Not after the pH tests, not after the fish die-offs, not after seeing a little girl's dog nearly die from toxins in what used to be clean spring-fed water. Then came the public hearing. It was held at the County Courthouse Auditorium, the largest building in Broward County. Hundreds of residents showed up, more than I had ever seen at any community event. Cameras were everywhere, local news, independent journalists, even a small documentary crew from an environmental YouTube channel. Karen arrived wearing a navy blue pantsuit and a thin, defiant smile. She carried a stack of papers and stood at the podium like she was auditioning for a position she'd already lost. She opened with a rehearsed statement about growth, shared vision, and unfortunate misunderstandings. Then it was my turn. I didn't bring speeches, I brought facts. I stood tall wearing my father's old Vietnam service pin on my lapel and spoke slowly, clearly, letting every word carry the weight of truth. I showed the maps, the drone footage, the sworn affidavits, the emergency declaration, the dead fish, the sick dog. I looked around the room as I spoke, meeting the eyes of every neighbor Sawood. Not to guilt them, but to remind them, this is our home, our water, our line in the dirt. And Karen had crossed it. When I finished, the silence was louder than applause. The county board voted unanimously to suspend all Meadow Hills HOA construction authority until further notice. The state confirmed a pending environmental lawsuit. A civil grand jury was being considered. But the best part, the sheriff's department posted 2 deputies outside the lake entrance with signs that read, "Construction halted trespassers will be prosecuted." Karen stormed out of the meeting, and that was the first time I saw her cry. Not on camera, not in front of the board, but alone in the parking lot, slumped against the side of her Lexus head, in her hands the paper fortress around her finally collapsing. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Instead, I went home, sat on my porch, watched the lake reflect the moonlight like it used to. The frogs hadn't returned. The turtles hadn't nested again. But the water was still. And for now, that was enough. 3 mornings later, I walked to the lake just after sunrise, the way my father used to thermos, in hand notebook under my arm. The fog hugged the surface like a silk shroud, quiet and cool, as if trying to conceal the damage that had been done. But even the mist couldn't hide the smell. The stench had worsened. It wasn't just cement anymore. It was the sour chemical reek of something deeper, like rust and ammonia. And then I saw them. Fish, dozens of them. Bluegill, bass, even a couple of the old yellow perch my father had once said would outlive us all. Floating belly up along the banks, eyes glazed gills, red and raw. Some twitched barely alive. Others had already sunk into the muck. I knelt, pulled my sleeve over my hand, and gently lifted one of the perch. Its scales had a powdery residue on them, chalky, off-white, and its mouth was locked open as if frozen in its final gasp. Whatever they poured into this lake, it wasn't just cement. It was poison. I called Erica first, then Sam Tate, then Maria Velez, the state DEP field officer. She didn't answer, but I left a message. The fish are dying. Something's wrong with the water chemistry, worse than surface runoff. I think they built a pipe. I couldn't prove it. Not yet. But my instincts were screaming. So I went back to my house, pulled the drone from its case and launched it high. I didn't focus on the lake this time. I focused behind the clubhouse. What I found chilled me. Just beyond the newly poured slab was a patch of freshly dug earth, covered clumsily with pine straw. No construction flags. No warning signs. But when I zoomed in, the soil had a faint trench-line pattern, straight and narrow and leading toward the lake. They'd laid something underground. I hiked over within the hour, took samples of the pine straw, the topsoil. Then, with gloved hands, I started to dig. 8 inches down, I hit something hard. PVC pipe, about 4 inches in diameter, running directly from the rear of the clubhouse property toward the lake. The pipe was capped, but poorly. A loose-fitting seal with a rubber gasket already warping from moisture exposure. Around it, the soil was moist and smelled like detergent and acid. Not gray water, not rain runoff. This was wastewater, and they'd been dumping it straight into the lake. Erica didn't say anything for a full 5 seconds when I called her. Then that's felony territory, Daniel. If they installed an illegal discharge pipe without state inspection or EPA notification, it's not just civil court anymore. That's federal. I asked her to prepare the necessary filings. Then I called Maria again and left a second message. By evening, she was at my door. We walked together to the trench, where I showed her the exposed pipe. She took water samples from both ends, using her official DEP kit this time. I didn't speak while she tested. "Chlorides are high," she murmured. "Suspended solids through the roof. And..." She paused, eyes narrowing. "There's benzene in here." My stomach twisted. From what? Solvent runoff. Could be from cleaning agents. Could be paint thinner. Could be industrial materials. She looked up at me. "None of it belongs in a lake. Not like this." She didn't need to say the rest. I already knew. Karen hadn't just poured cement into my lake. She'd built a discharge system illegally beneath the public eye. The cement had been a distraction, a cover for something far worse. A cheap system to handle waste from future events or construction. Cut costs. Avoid permits. Dump and forget. But the lake remembered. The next morning, I drove to the state EPA regional office myself. Delivered the samples in a sealed cooler with a signed affidavit. The receptionist looked startled when I walked in. But after a short phone call, a man in a blazer and field boots met me in the hallway and shook my hand. "Mr. Riggs, we've been expecting you." It moved fast after that. By the following Monday, a full EPA environmental inspection was underway. Hazmat suits, drones, soil core drills, the works. The inspection team cordoned off the entire east shoreline, with yellow caution tape. Cameras rolled. I didn't film. I didn't need to. I just watched. A week later, the report was released. Environmental Violation Code, Class 1, deliberate chemical discharge into protected waterway. Culpable parties, Meadow Hills HOA Board of Directors, President Karen Holt, personally named. Recommended action, civil and criminal charges pending state review. The fallout was immediate. Karen was served with an emergency injunction and subpoena the next day. When local news cameras caught her leaving her house, she looked like a ghost of the woman who once beamed behind a podium. Hair tied in a messy bun, sunglasses hiding swollen eyes. No pearl necklace this time. I heard through Tom Bellamy that the Meadow Hills HOA board was scrambling, directors resigning, emails disappearing, panic blooming like algae in summer heat. But they couldn't scrub what was already public. The documentary I posted had now surpassed 500,000 views. A new hashtag was trending in local activism circles, Lake Justice. People from across the state sent messages. Some offered legal advice. Others shared stories of similar HOA abuses. But most just said one thing. Thank you for standing up. And I should have felt vindicated, triumphant even. But all I felt was grief, because no amount of lawsuits could bring back the life that once teemed in that water. No court order could resurface the turtles or restore the nesting grounds. I spent hours every day just sitting on the porch, staring at the lake, remembering how it used to sound alive, wild, peaceful. Now it was quiet, too quiet. Even Scout didn't bark at the heron anymore. There were none left. And yet in that silence, I found something else. Resolve. Because the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. There was still more to uncover, more to rebuild, more to protect. And I was just getting started. By the end of April, the lake had made the news in 3 counties. The story wasn't just about environmental damage anymore. It had become a parable of greed, corruption, and the arrogance of people who thought a homeowners association could operate above the law. Karen's face was everywhere, on news sites, in community Facebook groups, and on a few national blogs covering the HOA horror story that made the governor blink. But while the world's attention turned toward her public unraveling, I focused on what mattered: building the legal case that would end her reign completely. Enter Erica Lynn. She wasn't just my lawyer, she was a storm in a suit. I'd worked with Erica before, back in my litigation days, when we teamed up against an energy firm that buried toxic sludge beneath a school's athletic field. She was 10 years younger than me, sharp as a scalpel, and absolutely relentless. The kind of woman who could recite federal land use codes while ordering coffee, and who once cross-examined a state contractor so hard he had a panic attack on the stand. When I first called her, she'd asked me one question: "Is this about revenge, Daniel, or is this about justice?" Both, I told her. She didn't hesitate. Then let's bury them in paper. We started with discovery. Erica filed an aggressive request for all Meadow Hills HOA records relating to the lake development, backdated 5 years. Meeting minutes, email chains, financial reports, bids from contractors, engineering documents, permits, even security camera footage from the clubhouse. The Meadow Hills HOA tried to stall, of course. Claimed they didn't retain digital archives. That communications were verbal, that certain files had been misplaced. Erica filed a motion to compel. Then another. Then followed it up with a formal complaint to the state's HOA Oversight Committee. She cited 4 statutes, 2 precedents, and a clause from the Meadow Hills HOA's own charter that required record keeping. It took 2 weeks, but the floodgates opened. What we found was damning. A proposal from Bayside Resort Holdings, signed by Karen, offering $2.5 million in phased development incentives if the HOA cleared community resistance and secured lake access. An email chain where Karen told her board, "We need to move faster. If Riggs files a lawsuit, we'll be stuck in limbo. Pour the foundation first. Let him sue after the fact." An internal document titled Phase 2, Private Boat Club Expansion, showing plans to turn my family's cove into a dock rental zone. Erica's eyes narrowed as she read. This isn't just negligence, it's conspiracy. We amended the suit to include fraud, willful trespass, and violation of state environmental codes. We added Karen personally as a defendant, as well as 3 members of the Meadow Hills HOA board. But we weren't done, because something else came to light buried in the emails from the Meadow Hills HOA's treasurer. A line item labeled simply, Stormwater Mod Redir. Private vendor. No permit rec. Erica read it out loud, then looked at me. This is the pipe, isn't it? I nodded. And just like that, the case escalated from civil court to criminal investigation. Meanwhile, Karen made one final, desperate move. She called a special Meadow Hills HOA meeting, claimed it was to clear the air and restore trust, promised transparency, promised answers, promised reform. It was held in the community clubhouse, the same building now partially shut down by state order. But people showed up, dozens of them. Some curious, some angry, some still clinging to the belief that she might explain it all away. I stood in the back, arms crossed, listening. Karen stood behind this podium, her hair perfectly curled, her lipstick firm, but her voice trembled just slightly as she began. I understand there's been confusion, she said. I want to assure you that every action taken by this board was in the best interest of our community. She called the cement pour an effort to improve lake safety. She called the discharge pipe a miscommunication with contractors. She blamed the EPA's findings on outdated testing equipment. And then, unbelievably, she blamed me. One individual, she said, has turned a simple beautification project into a statewide scandal. He has filmed our families, stalked our contractors, and submitted false claims to government agencies. I took one step forward. Slowly. Let everyone in that room see me. I'll speak now, I said. No, she snapped. You're not a board member. You have no... Actually, Erica said, appearing from the side door like a ghost, holding a printed copy of the Meadow Hills HOA Charter. According to Section 3F, any member in good standing may address the board for up to 5 minutes at an official meeting. Karen's face went pale. Erica nodded to me. Go ahead. I stepped up, paper in hand, and said nothing for the first 10 seconds. Just looked at them. At the neighbors who used to nod politely. At the board members shifting in their seats. Then I read aloud. To knowingly discharge harmful or toxic material into any public or private waterway in the state of Briar constitutes a felony under Statute 12401. To falsify construction permits, conceal environmental hazards, or tamper with stormwater systems is a Class A crime punishable by fines and imprisonment. I folded the paper, then said, and your president did all three. Gasps, murmurs, someone dropped a cup. Karen stepped back from the podium, stumbling slightly, as if the words had physically hit her. I turned, handed the paper to the HOA secretary, and walked out. Erica followed. We didn't need to stay. The board dissolved itself that night. 2 days later, Karen's lawyer called Erica, begging for a settlement. We declined. A week after that, she was served a criminal summons. The charges: environmental contamination, fraudulent use of association funds, unauthorized construction on private property, felony-level chemical discharge. Bail was set at $100,000. Her mugshot was on the evening news. And me, I watched in silence. No joy. No smugness. Just the steady calm of knowing the storm was passing. The lake was still sick, but at least now the poison had a name. If there's one thing I learned from years in the courtroom, it's this. People don't unravel all at once. They come undone thread by thread, quietly at first, then suddenly. Karen Holt unraveled exactly like that. It started with silence, the kind that spread like a disease. Her closest allies on the board stopped answering her emails. The Meadow Hills HOA's official Facebook page went dormant. Flyers were pulled from bulletin boards. Events were postponed indefinitely. The whispers around the neighborhood grew teeth. Then came the leaks. It began with an anonymous tip forwarded to my attorney's office. An internal email chain between Karen and the Meadow Hills HOA's treasurer discussing how to reallocate $72,000 of reserve funds without board approval. The money was supposedly earmarked for shoreline improvements, but the treasurer raised a red flag. We don't have a line item for a cement platform or pipework. Erica grinned when she read that one. They always put it in writing. Within days, more whistleblowers emerged. Former vendors, ex-board members, even one of the concrete crew leaders who admitted under oath that Karen had instructed them to pour as fast as possible and ask forgiveness later. But Karen wasn't just losing support, she was losing control. At the next emergency Meadow Hills HOA meeting, she didn't even show up. Instead, a shaken Vice President, Marty Teagan, stood before a packed room and read from a printed statement. Effective immediately, the Meadow Hills HOA Board is suspending all administrative functions, until an independent audit can be completed. People gasped. Some clapped. I just took a slow sip of coffee. But the real breaking point came 3 days later. A county building inspector one I hadn't even contacted showed up at my door holding a manila folder and a look of stunned disbelief. "I thought you should see this," he said. Inside the folder were inspection reports that had been altered, falsified permits, digital signatures that didn't match any county record. It turned out Karen had submitted documentation under the name of a retired official using a scanned signature cut and pasted from an old PDF. The inspector only found out because the man in question saw the construction on the news and called the office in outrage. Forgery, fraud, and now likely jail time. I called Erica immediately. "It's unraveling," I said. "No," she corrected, "it's collapsing." Meanwhile, Karen went on the offensive, at least the only way she knew how. She hired a crisis PR firm from out of state. They crafted a statement filled with vague denials, cherry-picked facts, and the kind of passive language only a guilty person clings to. If any unintended impact occurred. Community-driven initiative misinterpreted. Committed to transparency moving forward. She even filmed a glossy video, standing by the lake's edge, now taped off with EPA caution markers, insisting she loved this community and had only ever wanted to create something beautiful. The comments were brutal. People weren't buying it anymore. Not after the environmental test results, not after the fish die-offs, not after the mugshot that made the local newspaper's front page under the headline, "HOA President Indicted in Lake Scandal." But what broke her, what truly shattered whatever delusion of control she had left, wasn't the lawsuits. It was the people. One by one, neighbors began speaking up. The McCarthys, who'd lived 2 doors down from me for 20 years, wrote an open letter demanding Karen be barred from serving on any future boards. The Harris twins posted a video of their sick cat who'd drunk water near the lake. Even the Rotarians, once Karen's most loyal allies, voted unanimously to revoke her honorary membership. I heard she cried during that meeting. And then came the eviction. See, Karen didn't own her home. She rented it from a local real estate trust that had no interest in being linked to scandal. They gave her 60 days' notice. I saw the moving van pull up one morning just before sunrise. She loaded boxes in silence, her once pristine Lexus parked crooked on the driveway, hazard lights blinking. No one came to help. No neighbors offered a hand. She was alone. I didn't watch the whole thing, just long enough to see her close the trunk. She looked up toward the lake one last time, and then she was gone. But the damage wasn't. The lake still bore the wounds. The shoreline remained scorched with cement. Wildlife had not returned. Children no longer played near the edge. And though we'd won the legal war, the spiritual cost still hung in the air like fog. I stood at the waterline with Maria Velez from the DEP going over the remediation plan. She pointed to sections of the lake that needed dredging, explained how to stabilize the banks, how to detox the soil. It would take months, maybe years, to bring it back. "We'll do everything we can," she promised. "I'll help," I said. "Whatever it takes." She smiled. "You already have." That week, the governor's office issued a formal statement naming the Meadow Hills Lake incident a precedent-setting case for HOA regulation reform. New legislation was introduced that would increase oversight transparency and legal accountability for all homeowners associations in the state. And in a move no one expected, the governor himself came to the site. He arrived in jeans and boots, no cameras in sight, and shook my hand quietly. "Thank you," he said, "for not backing down." I didn't say anything, just turned toward the lake and watched as a breeze finally stirred the surface. Small waves, gentle, not angry, not broken, just healing. I heard the low thump-thump of the rotors before I saw the chopper. It was early morning, the light still pale across the water when the air vibrated with a distant churn. The sound grew louder, closer, until every leaf along the shoreline trembled. I stepped onto my porch just in time to watch the helicopter descend over the lake like something out of a war movie. The wind whipped the tall reeds into spirals, lifted dust from the gravel, and scattered the stack of court papers on my deck. It landed at the far edge of the Meadow Hills HOA's park, the same place where the illegal cement platform still sat like a tumor roped off with yellow caution tape and guarded by silence. 2 men and 1 woman stepped out. One wore the black blazer and slacks of a press secretary. The other man had a thin gray ponytail and the weathered look of a forest ranger. But it was the woman who led them. No press badge, no visible ID. And then I recognized her. Governor Rafael Montez's chief of staff, Nora Velasquez. She was known for never showing up unless the governor was right behind her. Sure enough, a second chopper appeared 5 minutes later, gliding over the trees and settling near the first like a hawk, joining its mate. And from that one he stepped out. Governor Montez. I'd seen him on TV dozens of times. A Vietnam-era Marine veteran turned prosecutor, turned reformist governor. Clean-cut, measured. The kind of man who chose his words like weapons and never blinked when he fired them. He was here in my town at my lake, and this wasn't a photo op. The visit wasn't announced publicly. No press, no podium, no big speeches. Montez didn't even head straight to the cluster of DEP and EPA field tents. He walked the lake edge, instead flanked only by his chief of staff and 2 agents with clipboards. When he reached my dock where I stood waiting in my father's old Carhartt jacket, he extended his hand. Mr. Riggs. Yes, sir. He shook my hand firmly. I read your full case file, the drone footage, the water testing, the whistleblower reports, all of it. You didn't just fight back. You documented every inch. I nodded once. My father taught me to keep records. He served 2 Korean War. Montez's expression softened slightly. Then I know he taught you what it means to hold the line. He looked out at the water, still dulled by the chemical foam near the cement scar. Frogs silent. Birds absent. I've seen oil spills, he said quietly. I've seen illegal dumping, corporate corruption, mining waste runoff. But I've rarely seen this kind of damage orchestrated by a neighborhood HOA. Most HOAs don't act like corporations, I replied. Karen did. She built a machine and used bylaws like camouflage. He turned back to me, and now she'll answer for it. The governor spent 3 hours touring the lake. No cameras, no reporters, just direct briefings with the state environmental team, the county attorney, and the water quality lab director. He walked the entirety of the cement perimeter. He crouched beside the pipe site. He asked hard questions, and no one gave him easy answers. At noon, he asked to speak with me privately. We sat beneath the shade of the old sycamore on my property's southern edge, the same spot where my father used to fish with me on summer mornings. Montez listened as I told him the whole story from my perspective, not the legal side, but the personal one. About the first fish kill, about Maddie's sick dog, about watching Karen pour cement at 2 in the morning while pretending she was saving the community. He didn't interrupt once, just listened. When I finished, he nodded slowly, then stood. We're declaring this area a Level 2 disaster zone under the State Ecological Integrity Act. That means emergency remediation funding. That means full state oversight of every step of restoration. And it means Meadow Hills HOA will never function in this region again. I stared at him. I'd hoped for fines, maybe even jail time for Karen, but this, you're shutting them down. He nodded. As of today, the HOA is under suspension pending full audit. The board is dissolved, and a state-appointed trustee will manage the remaining funds. We're also introducing legislation to increase legal liability for all HOA boards in the state. He turned to look at the lake again. People forget, he said, that government begins with neighbors. With the way we treat each other, the way we protect what's ours and what we all share. That lake was yours, yes, but it also belongs to your town, your state, your grandchildren, and we failed to guard it until it was almost too late. He offered his hand one more time. Thank you, Mr. Riggs, for standing guard when no one else would. The helicopters lifted off an hour later, leaving behind only wind and silence. But this time, the silence felt different. Not poisoned, not broken, just paused. Like the lake was listening. That evening, the state cleanup crew arrived with barges and filtration units. Hazmat-suited technicians set up a floating boom barrier to prevent further spread of contaminants. Large suction pumps began removing surface layers of chemical foam. I stood on the bank and watched it all like a man who just finished a battle and could finally begin to rebuild. Tom Bellamy walked up beside me, his hands in his jacket pockets. Thought you'd like to know, he said, nodding toward his phone. Karen's bond hearing was denied. I blinked, denied flight risk. Judge said she demonstrated patterned disregard for the law and public welfare. She's staying put. I exhaled. Good. Then, after a moment, not because I want her to suffer, but because she needs to sit with what she did. Tom nodded. Amen to that. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not just napped, not just closed my eyes, but truly slept. The kind of sleep that's earned. And when I woke the next morning and walked down to the Lake Scout running ahead of me, I saw something that made my breath catch. A single blue heron, standing at the edge of the marsh neck, high still as a statue, watching the water, waiting. Just like me. The disaster zone signs went up 2 days later, simple white metal placards staked into the ground at all 7 access points around the lake. They read, "Warning environmental hazard, state disaster zone. No entry without permit. Violators subject to penalty. Department of Environmental Protection. Order RDZ 1427. It was surreal. A lake my father and I had once fished in barefoot. A lake where Scout had learned to swim. A lake I'd defended with court filings, drone footage, and sleepless nights now wrapped in caution tape like a crime scene. Because that's what it was. A crime scene. But beneath the devastation, something else had begun to surface. Something sharp and public. Karen's fall from grace wasn't just quiet anymore. It was televised. Local reporters began showing up daily. First with long lenses and whispers, then with microphones and floodlights. The story had grown too big to ignore. HOA Gone Rogue read one headline. Lake War in Meadow Hills read another. Editorials popped up questioning the very existence of unchecked homeowner associations. National outlets reached out for interviews. Even a primetime cable show aired a 10-minute segment titled, "When Neighborhood Power Goes Too Far." Karen didn't respond at first. She was in hiding. At least that's what the neighbors said. Her house, once the epicenter of HOA meetings and wine tasting events, now sat dark most evenings. The porch plants wilted. The mailbox overflowed. Then came the subpoena. The county sheriff's deputy hand-delivered it, while reporters watched from the sidewalk. The footage ran that night. Karen answering the door in slippers and sunglasses, her voice tight, her expression crumbling. No spin, no statement, just shame. But she wasn't done, not yet. 2 days later, she held a press conference in front of the now shuttered Meadow Hills HOA clubhouse. She wore a blazer and pearls just like old times, though her posture had lost its proud tilt. Cameras flashed. A few loyalists gathered behind her. I stood off to the side, arms crossed, silent. She took the podium. "I want to begin," she said, voice quivering by acknowledging the pain that has come from this project. Her tone was subdued, but her words were laced with deflection. She blamed poor contractor communication, unclear bylaws, misunderstood intentions. She called the cement pour a temporary installation, the discharge pipe a non-permanent graywater system, and the entire investigation a politicized attack. When she mentioned my name, she didn't look at me. One individual, she said, has turned a simple beautification project into a public circus. Mr. Riggs has used personal connections and online smear campaigns to turn a neighborhood improvement into a public circus. The cameras turned to me. I didn't move, because she was unraveling, and nothing I could say would worsen her fate more than the truth already had. But then it happened. A woman I didn't recognize, maybe mid-30s, sharp-eyed, stepped forward from the crowd. Her voice cut through Karen's speech like a blade. "My son got sick from that lake. You told us it was safe." Karen faltered. I'm so sorry for your..." Another voice, "You used our HOA dues to build your vanity project." And another, "You lied about the board vote." The crowd shifted from passive to angry in seconds. Karen tried to speak again, but her microphone crackled with feedback. She stepped back, shielding her face from the press cameras. And that's when she broke. Not in words, in tears. She collapsed into the arms of one of her former board members, sobbing. Not the elegant single-tear kind. The heaving, shaking kind. The kind that didn't win sympathy, just finality. The cameras caught it all. Her pearl earring fell into the grass. Her mascara ran. Her reputation, once pristine in HOA circles, dissolved under the weight of public judgment. The next day, she formally resigned as president. The following week, she withdrew from the civil defense. And 1 month later, she accepted a plea deal for felony environmental negligence and HOA fund misuse. Sentence 18 months probation, 6 months house arrest. Full restitution of $112,000. Lifetime ban from serving on any homeowners association in the state. The clubhouse was boarded up and redesignated by the state as an environmental monitoring outpost. The cement platform was jackhammered out by DEP contractors. The pipe was removed entirely and filled with clay seal backfill to prevent future runoff. And me, I was asked to speak at a town forum on HOA accountability. I stood behind the same podium Karen once used, holding my father's fishing hat in my hand, and spoke to the room filled with reporters, lawyers, residents, even local politicians. I didn't set out to expose anyone, I said. I only wanted to protect the land my father loved. But when systems of power forget who they serve, it becomes our duty to remind them. Not with violence, not with vengeance, but with vigilance and with proof. They applauded. I didn't expect them to. I didn't need them to, because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about the lake. That evening, after the crowd dispersed, I walked down to the shoreline. A few frogs had returned. The reeds had started regrowing. The foam was gone, though a faint ring still marked where the chemicals had clung. And then I heard a splash. A single fish, small silver, broke the surface, leaping into the air before vanishing again beneath the water. Life was returning, one ripple at a time. Spring returned like an apology. It came gently through the shimmer of fresh leaves, through the mist that once again danced over the surface of the water at dawn, through the distant warble of birds that had been absent for too long. For the first time in months, the lake didn't smell like chemicals. It smelled like mud, like moss, like home. The environmental crews had finished the final phase of remediation. Sediment dredging had removed nearly 18 tons of contaminated sludge from the lake bed. The cement slab had been broken apart, hauled off, and replaced with native grasses planted by volunteers. One of the booms remained across the southern edge of the lake, a final line of defense in case something else went wrong, but the water behind it was clear. Not perfectly clean yet, but recovering. Like me, I sat on the dock most mornings now. Just sat. No legal files, no phones, no calls to state offices. Just a thermos of coffee, my dog Scout at my feet, and the soft lap of water against the shore. It was the first time in years I allowed myself stillness. A group of school kids came to visit the lake on a Thursday afternoon in May, part of a field trip on environmental conservation. Their teacher, a young woman named Ms. Rivas, had reached out to the DEP asking for permission to use the lake as a case study. The state not only approved it, they asked if I would be willing to speak. I didn't want to. At first, I didn't feel like a hero. I still had the nightmares of gray foam and floating fish of Karen's trucks in the night of that helpless burning rage in my chest. But then I thought of my father. He would have spoken. So I stood at the water,